Hello, I'm Jeremy Vine, and this is Panorama. Digging for the black stuff. British coal is born again, but at what cost?
This country has gone mad. I mean, just look at this.
As he sits in Downing Street, this is the moment the Prime Minister dreads, the moment when the lights go out. Industry shuts down, homes are plunged into darkness, and the streets aren't safe. It simply can't be allowed to happen. So are we facing an unwelcome choice? Sacrifice some of our precious landscapes in order to get the coal to keep the lights burning?
Britain was once peppered with coal mines. Then they were mostly hidden underground. Now coal is making a comeback on the surface as the government tries to secure the UK's energy supplies. And when quiet stretches of countryside are ripped up, people are horrified.
On the approach here, you see we came over those wonderful fields with lovely agricultural land, prime agricultural land. And then that thing seems to rear its ugly head. Absolutely awful.
Virg Rikiki lives next to this new open cast mine in Leicestershire. He can't understand why it was ever allowed.
I just don't know how to put into words how awful the site really looks from up here.
When it came to power, the government called huge excavations like this too high a price to pay in environmental terms. But has Whitehall now decided that coal comes first? The Delhi open cast mine in Northumberland. It's as deep as a tower block and nearly half a mile long. In 6 years, nearly 2 million tonnes of coal have been carved out of the ground here.
Energy supplies around the world are alarmingly unpredictable, but huge areas of this island are built on coal, billions of tons of it, and the government wants more of it used.
Flag-waving defiance from the last protesters at Prospect Farm this morning.
Environment activists concerned about global warming were among the first to wake up to a resurgence in coal.
Is it possible to square what the government said when it came into office about open cast mining with the decisions the government has actually made about open cast mining in the past couple of years?
No, it's clear that in practice now there is a presumption in favour of open cast mining, whatever official documents might say. We see time and again government ministers putting pressure on to make sure that open cast mines go ahead.
In Derbyshire, Britain's biggest mining company, UK Coal, is digging 1 million tonnes of coal out of the ground. But even though work has begun, protests continue.
Leave them alone.
When it's the same piece of land with no gate, no fence, an open piece of land walking through from the country park to what used to be the country park before it was stolen by UK Coal.
The county council rejected the scheme in line with Labour's election policy, but then they were overruled by the government.
Exactly where you are now is still Rit land.
The author of Labour's original policy thinks the shift in strategy is a step too far.
By and large, greenfield sites are best left as greenfields. We have to accept sometimes that housing has got to be built on them or other things that are useful to society. But there's nothing much useful to society about open casting. It is grotesquely ugly, it can be noisy, it is certainly dusty and dirty, and it's not good for people who live nearby.
Many opencast sites have a working life of 4 or 5 years. Not so here. The people of Merthyr Tydfil will have this giant hole on their doorstep for 15 years. It will make safe old mine workings and restore the land, but also yield 10 million tonnes of coal, enough to supply the energy needs of much of South Wales.
Do you think for one moment that a local authority in Guildford or Cobham would allow open casting to take place within 35 metres of the nearest house? Merthyr has paid a heavy price for industrialisation in the past. The coal banners want us to pay that same price again, raping the land of its assets at the expense of the people.
Why is this something that you preach about in your church?
Because we believe that God has given us a responsibility in the Anglican Church to care for the people, but also for the land. What I object to is the fact that right here in Merthyr Tydfil, in extreme proximity to thousands of homes, this open casting is taking place.
I'm about 400 metres away from this site.
Alison Austin bought her home in 2003, 2 years before the mining company Miller Argent was given permission to work here.
I actually live those red brand new houses that have been built just 4 or 5 years ago. There is no getting away from the noise. They start up at 7 o'clock in the morning. They got planning permission to work until 11 o'clock at night.
When do they actually finish?
They actually finish now at 10 o'clock after a long and hard fight with them. But whereas they were finishing at 1 on a Saturday, they're now working till 5 to make up for it. You can't go to bed until those machines have closed down for the night. My children can't sleep until after 10 o'clock. It's not good for children. They have to be up at 7 o'clock in the morning.
You've become a protester. Has this become something of a game for you now?
No, it hasn't. It's my life. You've got to understand that. It is my life. What this is doing is destroying my life. It's not a game at all.
As work proceeds, the site will be greened over, starting closest to the nearby houses. Miller Argent say health and safety are of the utmost importance. In a statement, the company said,
"The earliest stages of the project regrettably caused disruption for those near to the site, but complaints about dust and noise, which have always been limited in number and location, continue to decline, down to 2 complainants last month. Members of the community are helping us with our programme of continuous improvement."
Fossifran is a sign of an industry in revival. Just before the opencast scheme was approved in 2005, UK Coal was complaining that winning planning consent had become increasingly difficult. Documents released to Panorama under the Freedom of Information Act reveal that 4 years ago there was intense lobbying by UK Coal to secure its future.
The company took its concerns all the way up to Tony Blair's officials at number 10, saying that opencast mining in England faced almost complete extinction. What was needed, they said, was a change in policy.
Panorama has learned that the government felt it couldn't be seen to relax its policy against opencast mining. But within weeks, new guidelines appeared saying opencast plans could be allowed if environmental damage was kept to an acceptable minimum. The coal companies took this as the green light to challenge for more opencasting. UK Coal decided to fight a test case in the pretty village of Ravenstone in Leicestershire. The company had asked for planning permission to dig nearly 750,000 tonnes of coal out of a green field site next to the village. This met with fierce opposition.
Just checking your flexible brake pipes.
Garage owner Virg Rikiki and local MP David Taylor have been fighting proposals for mining their countryside for years. They were delighted when the County Council rejected the scheme.
But the core reason was that the cumulative impact of open casting on this area had gone beyond the level which was acceptable.
But with millions of pounds at stake, UK Coal wanted the decision overturned. The application to mine in Leicestershire went to a public inquiry, and in May 2006, the County Council was eventually overruled by the government that had previously been so against open casting.
The inquiry was a travesty, an utter travesty. Sadly and unaccountably, it went through.
They'll say one thing today, and tomorrow they'll change their mind, hoping that people will have forgotten about it.
We're actually sitting on coal. The whole area, probably a 30-40 mile square area. We've just been over that wonderful woodland. And they'll have no compulsion in removing all of that to get the coal from beneath it if they needed to.
They do return it to countryside after they finish.
Yes, but how do you return a 150-year-old mature oak tree? How do you make hedgerows as diverse and ancient as they are here?
UK Coal says such fears are unwarranted, but residents have real concerns about expansion.
What about all the coal in the fields around here? Millions of tonnes.
Yeah.
You're just going to leave that?
We have no intentions of going outside of this site boundary. We actually have we've been written into a legal agreement on that. We'll finish this scheme on time, and we'll do what we said we were going to do.
So, if Panorama comes back here in 2 years' time, you'll not be saying, well, actually, we think there might be another few 100,000 tonnes of coal we'd like to go for.
Yeah. You won't. Actually, where you'll be standing, you'll be in a field.
Approval for the opencast site at Ravenstone marked a turning point. Shortly before its success there, UK Coal was feeling far more bullish. Its chairman reported,
"We are more optimistic that further planning approvals will be obtained, which will allow access to substantial reserves."
He was right. Last year, no opencast applications were rejected, while 14 were approved, compared with just 4 in 2005. In the 1980s, the coal industry couldn't pay its way.
The annual losses in the coal industry are enormous, 1.3 billion last year. You have to find that money as taxpayers.
Now then, here we are at pit bottom. Watch your head, watch your feet, please.
But the industry is now talking confidently of expansion. At the moment, coal mined in Britain provides just 10% of our electricity. But there are hopes that this will now increase.
Higher international prices means that the reserve base is certainly there to support a higher level of output, and we hope to be able to increase output somewhat from the level that it is at the moment.
So do you expect there to be more opencast sites in Britain?
Either more or larger ones, or ones lasting a longer period of time.
Do you see why it looks as if the government has reversed its policy here? It came in against opencast mining on greenfield sites. It's now giving approval for opencast mining on greenfield sites. It looks like a U-turn, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it's a U-turn.
Looks like one.
I think there is some shift in emphasis. I mean, let's look at what we're talking about here. Output in the opencast mining peaked as recently as 1991 at 21 million tonnes. It's since fallen to about 8.5.
And it's now rising.
We would expect some increase in production, but only to the level of perhaps 10 to 11 million tonnes a year. We as operators would clearly like to produce as much as we can, but we recognise, I think, that within those environmental constraints, output is likely to rise to 10 to 11 to 12 million tonnes a year, something in that range.
Which means more.
Which is more than has been, but certainly considerably less than at some time in the past.
Not everyone is as happy as the mining companies. Coal has become a new focus of direct action protests.
This is not a riot! This is not a riot! This is not a riot!
In August, opponents of coal staged one of the biggest climate change demonstrations the UK has ever seen at Kings North in Kent, where there are plans to build a new coal-fired power station. Their main concern is that 80% of the global rise in carbon dioxide is caused by burning fossil fuels. And you don't get worse than coal. The government is pinning its hopes on clean coal technology called carbon capture and storage. But is that all they are? Hopes.
Mr. Speaker, the government accepts all of the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. We will amend the Climate Change Bill to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, and that target will be binding in law.
It's easy enough to promise a dramatic cut in carbon emissions. The hard part is to deliver it.
Turn right on Dresden-Strasse.
You have to travel to a small town in eastern Germany to see the world's first project to make dirty old coal an environmentally friendly fuel. Why is this plant important?
Vattenfall is building the world's first pilot plant for carbon capture and storage, which means that we will capture CO2 from the combustion process of a coal power plant in order to liquefy and then store it underground to get rid of CO2 emissions.
Isn't this really too little too late?
We have to act really, really fast in order to combat climate change. But right now, there are no other options. We do believe that we will need to have an energy supply fully based on renewables within a few years' time. But until this plan has been developed, we need an idea of how to deal with coal and CO2 emissions.
In Britain, the government says it wants clean coal technology developed because it can cut 90% of emissions. But to date, there's no working pilot project here.
We're a little bit disappointed that there are not perhaps 2 or 3 demonstration projects in this country. There's going to be about a dozen projects or perhaps more in Europe as a whole. And if the government had arranged for 2 or 3 of these to be in this country, I think that would have demonstrated more effective leadership.
Build on existing power stations.
Tom Burke has advised 3 environment secretaries and has worked for both Labour and Tory governments. He's incensed at the slow pace of progress here towards clean coal technology.
We'll have to build. The real problem is that the government's talking a wonderful talk on climate change, but it's not actually squaring that in terms of its actions. We really need to be much further ahead than we are now, and the reason we aren't much further ahead than we aren't now is because simply the government hasn't been prepared to spend the money to get going. What you get from the government is a lot of rhetoric. What you don't get from the government is a lot of clear commitment to spend the money needed to turn that rhetoric into reality. The government is lethargic.
We wanted to ask the government about its policy on coal and whether it is lethargic about clean coal technology. But we're told no minister is available for an interview with Panorama.
The Department of Energy told us,
the UK is a global leader in promoting carbon capture and storage. We're one of just 4 countries in the world with concrete plans for a demonstration plant. Ed Miliband is pushing for agreement on EU-wide financing to realise the EU's aim of having 12 CCS plants across Europe by 2015.
While we wait for carbon capture to become a reality, the plan is still to increase the amount of coal we take out of the ground. Nearly 3/4 of the coal we burn is currently shipped in from Russia and South Africa, even Australia. But the government wants to secure the UK's energy supply. There are plans to open some new deep mines and extend the few we still have, including this one at Thoresby in Nottinghamshire. But the fact remains that opencast mining is far more attractive, both to the industry and politicians.
Opencast coal is easier to get at. You can get at it much more quickly than you could from a deep mine like this. A deep mine like this would probably take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to develop, whereas an opencast site, once you have planning permission, you can be in and working very quickly and taking coal out very quickly.
Where are we likely to see companies applying to opencast mine?
Well, I think over the last 15 to 20 years, what you've seen is a lot of applications on brownfield sites. That stock of brownfield sites has now run down. There are a lot fewer than they used to be. So I think you're probably more likely to see applications on greenfield sites than you were in the past.
Much of this expansion is expected to be on greenfield sites in Scotland, which has a long tradition of opencast mining. When the government has recently given the go-ahead for opencast coal mining on greenfield sites, is that in line with the policy on which you were first elected?
No, I think it can only be described as a reversal of that policy.
Is it a U-turn?
Well, I don't know whether it's a U-turn, but it's certainly a turn for the worse.
Even here at the Gibbside estate near Gateshead, the National Trust fears that it too could soon be a neighbour to opencast mining. The gardens here were created by the family of the late Queen Mother and form one of the North's finest landscapes.
People really want a green space, a green oasis, somewhere where they can go for walks and feel safe, enjoy the wildlife and the views and the vistas. And literally a few hundred metres behind us on the hillside, we have the prospect of a major opencast coal mine.
An opencast pit here would certainly form a spectacular contrast. This one at the Delhi site, just a few miles away in Northumberland, is twice the size of the proposed mine at Gibbside.
Do you really think this can ever be regarded as environmentally friendly?
Well, I believe that the proof is there in front of you in terms of the way that the operation is taking place.
But it looks appalling.
Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, of course.
Well, you're not going to tell me this is beautiful.
It is beautiful to some. As an engineer, I find this a very efficient operation. I like what I see in front of me. To the outside world, what we've got here is an operation that can't be seen, heard or felt by the outside world.
The coal companies are at pains to point out that they do landscape the area once they've removed the coal.
The scene spread out behind me is that of a water feature created from the remnants of a surface mining operation that was completed some 8 years ago by Banks Mining. The lake itself is a result of a mining operation that extended to some 50 metres in depth.
That was where the great hole in the ground was?
That's correct, yes.
Banks Mining is about to start digging on a nearby site at Shotton. They've told local residents that as they take the coal out of the ground, they'll fill in the hole and create a 1,000-foot-long earthwork in the shape of a naked woman.
We were told this is a park, it's going to be a beautiful structure at the end of it. But what we were not told was the means by which that was going to be achieved. 32-ton truck lorries going up and down the same roads that our children used to get to school, the pollution which is going to be caused. It really was a situation where at the beginning we were not told the full truth. We had to get it out of them.
I believe as a company that we go to great lengths to be open with local communities. And I certainly refuse any suggestion whatsoever that we weren't upfront in terms of our proposals.
Once again, the County Council rejected the opencast proposal. And once again, following an expensive public inquiry, the government gave it the go-ahead.
We were obviously very, very disappointed. It seemed to give very little weight to the potential damaging effects on the regeneration of the area and the decision seemed to underestimate the environmental harm that we considered it would cause.
Do you need the government to clarify exactly what it wants in respect of open cast mining?
I think it would be helpful if the government was more explicit on what it sees as the role of open cast coal in the future.
Behind the scenes, the government has been quietly promoting open cast mining across the country. In Fosse-Fran, protesters obtained letters which reveal strong pressure from Westminster on the Welsh Assembly to get the open cast site approved.
And this second letter, also from the Department for Trade and Industry, from Mike O'Brien, who was then Minister for Energy. What does he say?
Now, he's saying that he's very pleased that a previous application has been approved and the Welsh Assembly now give urgent consideration to the Fosse-Fran application. He's saying he understands that the concerns of the residents and the concerns of the environment, but unfortunately the need for coal outweighs those concerns.
The government has a completely contradictory set of policies. On the one hand, it's encouraging us to try to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels by all means possible. On the other hand, it has an official policy to maximise the production of fossil fuels. So its policy on supply is totally out of sync with its policy on demand.
I think the government now realises that the industry can operate in more sensitive areas, but I also believe now that the government recognises that coal is a vital fuel for the United Kingdom.
Jerry Northam reporting, and the latest news is that the rise of open cast mining has some way to go yet. County councils are becoming increasingly reluctant to use taxpayers' money to oppose such projects for fear that Whitehall will simply overrule them and give them the go-ahead anyway. We know that one council, Northumberland, has already given approval to dig up another greenfield site because the government has made it much harder to object. Next week, I'll die when I choose. Scottish politician Margot MacDonald, who's suffering from Parkinson's disease, asks if assisted suicide